My brothers and my sisters, as a church, as a nation, as a community, we're experiencing so much pain and anxiety and lament together these days. And there's two ways you can go about responding to that kind of pain. One is to withdraw and try to remove yourself from the source of pain, and the other one is to lean in and grow from it. And as a community, we want to grow. We want to grow closer to God, closer to each other. So we're going to have many discussions in midweeks and Sundays and additional talks and interviews with experts and people who can tell us more and enlighten us about these things. Today is an introduction to a brother who is very close to me. His name is Kevin Holland. He's an African-American evangelist. He leads a church in Los Angeles called Turning Point. We've served in the ministry together for a number of years. And I want to show you a 15-minute video of him sort of processing this and teaching about this. And I want to encourage you to watch this either separately, but then come together as a small group, and we'll have some questions for us to discuss together. And then the next day, tomorrow, we will also have a live event with Kevin Holland where we can have a Q&A and interact more thoroughly with him. So watch this, and I hope this brings you closer to God and closer to each other.
I can't breathe. That statement was made by Eric Garner a few years ago before he died, before he lost his life, before it was taken by a police officer. And this past Monday, George Floyd, a 46-year-old African-American man, lost his life as he was pinned to the pavement, and a police officer had his knee on his neck, and the video that was taken heard him or caught him saying several times that he couldn't breathe. There have only been a few times, thankfully, in my life where I can remember being short of breath and not being able to catch my breath. And it's an awful feeling. And this is such an awful, evil, despicable reality that we deal with, and that's all too commonplace in the United States in 2020. And that is that there's devaluing of the lives of African American men and women, and just a brutality that is accepted among many either white officers or just white citizens in our country. And I think that it's reached a level that is beyond what I have felt before. And this wasn't the message that I had planned on doing, but it's the only one that I can give because of where my heart and spirit are. And I believe that God is no less working now than before this happened. But trying to be authentic to the moment and trying to communicate what's on the depth of my heart and so many others that I know, it to me is the need of the hour. And so I want to say that the thing I feel most is anger right now. I feel sad for sure. And as I did when I shared about the murder of Ahmaud Arbery a few weeks ago, I feel those emotions. Maybe it's the compound effect of events like this happening back to back that we know of. Maybe it's the chilling thought that were it not for the videotape, these people probably would have just gone on to do their thing and live their lives, and we would never have known. Makes me think of how many dozens, scores, hundreds of other black men have been killed with impunity. And there's a rage that I feel that is different than I am used to feeling. Many of you know me and know that I'm not one of these people that walks around, ready to explode. And yet I feel it more now than I have. And it's not because the situation is different. It's been this way. It's unfortunately an ugly, evil legacy that's part of the dark side of being an American citizen, an inheritance of 401 years of devaluing black life. And obviously, spectacular and phenomenal progress has been made, and yet, in some ways, perhaps not as much as we would like to think. And that's what this situation shows. The late poet and essayist of the 20th century, James Baldwin, wrote, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." And I don't know if you've ever heard of this stereotype of type of the angry black man, but it is one that I had heard growing up, and it's this idea that somehow those of us of my ethnicity are inherently angry, as though it's some sort of deficiency or something wrong with us, which actually it's a form of manipulation and gaslighting from our society, who for so long, many of whom for so long, people in our society have acted as though this is an exaggeration. It doesn't really exist. It's just, somebody wanting sympathy or playing the victim. And so I feel called by the Spirit to share with us that you should feel angry about this, because I believe God feels angry about this. The Old Covenant, New Covenant are filled with passages that speak to God's anger at injustice, his anger at human beings not treating each other as though we all bear the image of God. Jesus was angry at times. He overturned the tables and drove out the money changers in the temple. And scripture records where he's really angry at the stubbornness and hard-heartedness of people that he's talking to about wanting them to learn about God. And so we should be angry. To not be angry that means I'm out of touch or I don't care. And those are worse. The thing, though, is I think God wants us to channel our anger into positive action. He wants us to be angry but sin not. And you can be angry and not sin. You can be angry and sin, and you can be angry and not sin. I think he wants us to feel anger at the inhumanity and injustice that we've seen, but to channel it in a positive way. And so I want to encourage us to do what we can. We saw in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery that the action of who knows how many, countless, probably millions of citizens making calls, calling local and federal government officials and demanding justice and advocating and saying we cannot abide this, really to move the needle, and how that case was prosecuted. And so I think the same thing needs to happen among us. I think we need to be willing to give money to and donate to causes and groups that are advocating for reform, and advocating for positive action and advocating to make sure justice is done in this situation. Perhaps we need to make a trip, maybe just to spend some time with people in these cities, and just what's it like to live here and to see this happening in your neighborhood, and just communicate solidarity. King Lemuel, who wrote Proverbs 31 all those thousands of years ago, said, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensure justice for those being crushed." So yes, it is part of what it means to be someone who's living for the purposes and the will of God, to speak up in these situations, and to not be just someone who sort of compartmentalizes their life. There's my social life, there's my spiritual life, there's my political life, there's my personal life. Really, there's one life. It's not segregated. And everything is spiritual. Everything has a spiritual connotation to it. So I think that's the opportunity that God has given us. As well, we need to make sure in the church that we are sensitive to the needs and our mandate to help people find their place in God's story, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, to love each other like Jesus loved his guys, and to treat each other in that way, to not succumb to or go down to the level of worldly, what people in our society do to, reach the ends that they want to reach. And positive ends do not justify unrighteous means. So we need to make sure that as we are trying to work for good things, we don't do it in an unrighteous way. In the church, we need to understand we primarily identify as Jesus followers. And in fact, Paul wrote that to the church in Galatia in Galatians chapter 3, verse 26. He said, "For you are all children of God through faith in Jesus Christ. All of you have been united with Christ in baptism, have put on Christ, like putting on new clothes." And then he says this, "There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female." And we could add to that Asian American, Hispanic American, African American, white American. He says that those things don't exist in the realm of the church because we are God has made us into one new humanity. And that needs to be our primary identifier. He says, "And now that you belong to Christ," in verse 29, "you are the true children of Abraham. You are his heirs, and God's promise to Abraham belongs to you." So we need to balance those. We need to not put our head in the sand and act like nothing is going on in our world or that we're not responsible for making a positive difference. At the same time, we don't need to let what's evil outside of the church infect we who are in the church, because the church is the hope of the world. And so I want to encourage us, those of us that are African American in Turning Point, I want to say that you should feel angry. It's normal to feel angry. You need to express your anger, and it's completely understandable and can be done in a righteous way. What we don't need to do is suppress it, stifle it, and feel as though somehow something is inherently wrong with us because we feel it. At the same time, we need to make sure we don't vent or take out our anger on anyone else, and certainly not any of our brothers and sisters who are of a different ethnicity. We need to understand that they're not going to get us any more than we get them in the ways that someone of a different ethnicity would get them. And one of the beauties of our church is that we're so racially diverse. We're the last time we checked, 30% African American, 30% European American or white, 30% Hispanic, 8 to 10% Asian, and 2% other. So we're all mixed up. And each of us is really trying to, I believe our church is working hard at being sensitive to each other and inhabiting the same space. And it makes life so much better and so much richer, but it has a cost, and that takes more effort to get what it's like to be in someone else's skin. But the reward is well worth the effort. So I just want to ask us, let's take being our brother's keeper up a notch. If you're not African American, you shouldn't walk around feeling this nebulous guilt as though you are the perpetrator of this. By the same token, I would ask you as a friend and as a brother to not just turn a blind eye as well, any more than if something else were going on with somebody else or you were hurting, that someone would need to turn a blind eye to you. I would encourage you to be curious and to take a minute to think about, what if someone who looked like you or looked like your father or your son were on the ground, police officers knee on his neck, saying that he couldn't breathe, and then you see him being murdered? How would you feel, and what would you want someone of a different ethnicity to be for you, and then be that for your friend? As we've seen through this time, God keeps helping people find their place in his story. He keeps helping people develop deeper relationships. God is working in our church, helping to feed people who don't have food in El Salvador and other places, meeting the needs of those in need in our church body and around. And so God is continuing to work. And I think he can work through this. I think he can help us be better Jesus followers, to better reflect who Jesus was through this, and help make our world and our society a better place. So let's let him do that. Let's be sensitive to the Spirit, and let's not allow the world to shape how we act, but let's let the Spirit of Jesus lead us into being a positive influence in this world. Thank you for listening. We're in this together. We're better together. I love you. I love being a part of this family, and I love seeing where God has brought us thus far, and I can't wait to see where he's going to take us. God bless.